Everyone mocked the Duke for buying the worthless Cliff estate, until a dying stallion led him to the woman who changed everything. The Marquess arrived on a morning that smelled like rain. His carriage came up the cliff road slowly, the way powerful men often move, without urgency, because urgency implies the possibility of not arriving. He stepped out at the gate of Devil's Shelf Estate, with a solicitor beside him and a smile that had cost other people a great deal over the years. He looked at the estate, at the cliffs, at the sea beyond. Then he looked at the two people standing in the yard. Dylan Pope, Duke of Ormond, stood with his arms at his sides and the stillness of a man who has decided something and will not be moved from it. Beside him stood a woman. She was not dressed for company. Her hair was not arranged for company. She had been in the stable an hour before, and her hands showed it. And she held herself with the specific posture of someone who has spent 7 years being told she does not belong in rooms like this, and has decided, finally, that she disagrees. The Marquess looked at her, and something moved behind his pleasant eyes that was not pleasant at all. "Lady Genevieve," he said. "What a surprise." She said nothing, but the Duke moved, barely perceptibly, barely an inch, closer to her. The Marquess noticed. His smile did not waver. But something in the room, in the open salt air of that Cornish morning, shifted. Because the Marquess Owen had ruined Genevieve Oliver 7 years ago, and assumed she had stayed ruined. He had not accounted for a dying horse. He had not accounted for a duke who bought worthless things. And he had not accounted for what happens when two people who have both been told they are finished decide together that they are not. This is where the story begins. But to understand what was really happening in that yard, to understand why a woman who had survived 7 years of silence was standing her ground, with mud on her hands and a duke at her shoulder, you must first understand what each of them had lost, and what a storm in November carried to the right cliff at exactly the right moment. Dylan Pope was 48 years old, and had been responsible for other people's problems since he was 19. That was the year his father died, the year Dylan inherited a title, a name, and debts that took him the better part of a decade to fully understand, and another decade to quietly, methodically, relentlessly begin paying down. He had done it correctly, without spectacle, without complaint. London respected him the way you respect a stone wall. It's useful. It holds. You don't think much of what it costs to build. He had never married. There had been a woman once, early, when he was young enough to believe love and duty could share a room without one destroying the other. Her family had looked at his finances and made the sensible choice. She left. And Dylan had learned something that settled into him, like a stone into water, that certain things cost more than money. The cost of hoping and being wrong. The cost of letting someone pass the wall and watching them decide the wall was the point. He had not made that mistake again. By 48, he was competent, slightly fearsome, and deeply, quietly exhausted in the way of a man who has been holding something heavy. So long he has forgotten what his hands feel like empty. When he saw the listing for Devil's Shelf Estate in Cornwall, 600 acres of dramatic cliffside, barren, windswept, with a house that seabirds had nested in for 3 years, he could not have explained what he felt. He went alone to see it. Stood at the edge of the cliff in the sharp salt wind and looked at the Atlantic for a long time. It was the first thing in years that felt like breathing. He bought it that week. London laughed for a month. The Duke of Ormond, they said, has finally lost his mind, spent his last fortune on a pile of rocks. Dylan went to Cornwall and let them. He did not know what was coming. He did not know that the laughing would stop. 7 miles from Devil's Shelf, at the end of a lane most people had stopped using, there was a farmhouse called Wren Hollow. Lady Genevieve Oliver had lived there for 7 years. She was 42, silver threaded through dark hair. Hands that had learned things her upbringing had never considered necessary. In the nearest village, they called her the lady who knows horses, and came to her when medicine failed, and the animal was still worth saving. She had been something else once, the daughter of a baron, wife of a decent man who died and left her an estate, and the surprising discovery that she was competent at managing it. For 3 years she had managed, carefully, diligently, with a precision that made her solicitor mildly startled. She had modernized, kept the accounts clean, paid her people. Then Marquess Owen arrived. He came as a neighbor, then as a business associate, then as a man offering to manage certain financial complexities on her behalf. He was charming with the convincing seamlessness of someone who has practiced it. Until it looks like sincerity. She trusted him. She did not know he was forging documents beneath the trust, redirecting income, building a fiction of her incompetence, brick by patient brick, until the day he chose to bring it before a civil court and present himself not as a thief, but as a long-suffering creditor. The trial lasted 3 days. She sat through every hour of it, watching evidence she knew was fabricated and unable to prove it, because the one document that would have proven it, her original management contract, had disappeared from her solicitor's office weeks before the case was heard. She lost the estate, the income, everything except Wren Hollow, which Owen's lawyers had missed. She also lost her name, because Owen was not satisfied with the money. He wanted the story. He wanted disorganized widow, financial incompetence. Women cannot be trusted with responsibility. He circulated it through London with the same pleasant thoroughness he applied to everything. She was 35. She went to Wren Hollow. She did not go back. 7 years she spent building something from nearly nothing, learning what she hadn't been taught, because it was considered unnecessary. How to treat a horse's fever, how to grow what she needed, how to exist in the specific silence of a life that had been taken from her, and not let that silence become who she was. She was not bitter. Bitterness requires a kept flame. Genevieve had let that flame go years ago because she needed the energy for other things. She was simply finished with certain things. Men who offered help, titles that meant nothing, expecting anything good to come down that lane. She trusted the horses. They did not care about scandal. They were in pain or they were not. They needed help or they did not. It was, she had found, a profound relief. She had no idea a storm was coming. She had no idea what the storm would carry. It arrived on a Thursday night in November. Dylan was sitting with a book when the windows began to shake. He set it down. He was not someone who could remain still while something needed managing. It was both his greatest strength and, on evenings like this, an inconvenience. He took a lantern and went outside. The wind hit him like a physical wall. The rain was nearly horizontal. He checked the stable. His horses distressed but secure. He checked the east boundary wall, standing. He was turning back when the lantern caught something inside the gate. Something dark. On the ground. The horse was enormous. Or had been. He was lying on his side, with the stillness of something that had stopped fighting. And the true scale of him only became clear when Dylan crouched beside him in the mud. 17 hands. A head that even in this state had the architecture of something bred with intention. Alive, barely. Dylan put his hand on the animal's neck. The scars were not storm damage. He had seen battlefields. He knew the difference between a single violent event and pain administered over time, systematically by someone who made it a practice. His jaw tightened. He stayed in that stable all night, on his knees in the mud, pressing his hand against the horse's neck, talking to him in the low, steady voice he had used with frightened soldiers in different fields a long time ago. "You're not dying tonight," he said. "Not on my land," the horse breathed. By dawn, he had taken a small amount of water from Dylan's hand. But he needed more than Dylan knew how to give. He sent his manservant Holt into the village with one question. "Who in this area genuinely knows horses?" Holt returned with one name. The widow at Wren Hollow. Lady Genevieve. She keeps to herself. There was some unpleasantness in London years ago. But if the animal can be saved, she's the one. Dylan looked at the horse. "Go," he said. "Tell her it's urgent." She came before the village woke. He had expected someone's clinical, someone who would assess, prescribe, depart. He had not expected a woman who walked into the stable and went directly to the horse, without looking at the Duke first, who knelt in the straw with the unhesitating focus of someone who has decided this animal is the only thing in the room that matters. She worked in silence. Her hands moved without wasted motion. He watched her. He could not have said why he watched her the way he did. It was not the moment for it. He was aware of that. He simply found that looking away required more effort than it should have. After several minutes, she sat back on her heels. "He's been starved," she said, deliberately. "And these wounds." She stopped, touched the edge of a scar very carefully. "These are years old. He's been managed through pain for a long time. Can you save him?" She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the horse. The animal's eye had opened and found her. Dark, enormous, with the specific wariness of a creature who has learned that human attention generally means pain. She held his gaze. "Yes," she's flat, certain, like a promise made to the horse directly. Dylan exoed. "I'll have a room prepared," he said. "You shouldn't travel back and forth in this weather." "That's not necessary. A room will be prepared." She looked at him then. Really looked. Assessing the kind of man who sends for help and then insists on taking responsibility for the person he called. Whatever she found in his face, she accepted it. "Very well," she said, and turned back to the horse. The first 3 days they barely spoke. She arrived early and worked late. He handed her things without being asked. Warm water, clean cloth, the specific light she needed when she was dressing wounds. He did not explain what he knew. He did not explain what he didn't. He simply paid attention and acted accordingly. On the 4th morning, the horse stood for the first time. It was tentative, trembling slightly. But he stood, and Genevieve made a sound that was too small to be called anything. And Dylan, standing at the stable door, felt something move in his chest that he could not have named precisely. She named the horse that afternoon. Corvus, Latin for raven. She said it quietly to the horse, not to Dylan. But Dylan heard. He responded to it, she said, not turning around. "Horses generally know more than we give them credit for." She turned then. She was almost smiling, not performing a smile. Just the small involuntary version that happens before you can manage it. When she looked up, he was watching her. Not the horse, her. She looked away. I should check the shoulder wound. Of course, he said. He did not move immediately. In the evenings she stayed later as Corvus improved. The Duke would be on the cliff path at that hour. They would encounter each other. The first conversations were practical. The horse. The repairs she could see happening to the house. The strange light that the Cornish coast made at dusk. Then one evening she told him about the herbs she grew. He asked real questions. Not polite questions, the kind designed to signal interest while actually waiting for their turn to speak. He wanted to know how she had learned, she told him. About the years after the trial, the books borrowed from the village lending library, the plants she killed before she understood them, the specific humility of learning things you were never supposed to need. You rebuilt everything from nothing, he said, from nearly nothing. I had Wren Hollow, she paused. Most people have less. Still, he said. She looked at the sea. You did something similar, she said, with the debts. I was still in London when the worst of it was public. I heard about it, a pause. What did you hear? That you were paying them down quietly, correctly, without, she searched for the word, without performing your suffering for the people who wanted to see it. He was still. I thought that was admirable, she said, not warmly, simply, like a fact she had held for years without occasion to say. The wind moved between them. The trial, he said carefully. I was abroad for most of it. I heard Owen's version. That was the only version available. It was the wrong version. He said it simply, not as comfort, as a correction he was placing in the record. A woman who managed an estate successfully for 3 years does not simply become incompetent. That requires more explanation than the one being offered. Genevieve was quiet for a long moment. Something against pressed a place she had sealed off years ago. She had not expected the seal to be fragile. She was almost embarrassed by it. Most people did not think that carefully about it, she said. Most people do not think carefully about most things. She looked away. No, she said, they don't. 3 weeks in, she found the second mark. She was cleaning the shoulder wound when her cloth caught on something beneath, the regrown coat at the horse's chest. She parted the hair carefully, older scar tissue. A different brand entirely, a single crowned letter, A. She went very still. She knew that mark. She stood up slowly and went to find the Duke. She found him in the library. Surrounded by the books he was still arranging, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has waited years for shelf space. He looked up. Read her face. What is it? She told him about the brand, about the Ashmore bloodline, about what it meant. A direct descendant of one of the most prestigious breeding programs in England, dissolved in 1879. Surviving descendants extraordinarily rare. Tens of thousands of pounds, she said quietly, possibly more. He was very still. Owen didn't know, she said. He treated him as a common horse, starved him, broke him, didn't register him properly because he didn't know what he had. And when he comes looking, he'll come. And when he does, he'll say the horse is his. Her voice was perfectly level. He'll say we stole him. He's done this before. He knows exactly how to frame it. Something moved beneath Dylan's expression. Something cold and controlled and very old. Tell me everything, he said. About what he did to you, all of it. I need to understand it completely. She looked at him. She had not told anyone the full story in 7 years. Not because she couldn't, because there was no one who had earned it. "Sit down," she said. She told him everything: the forged documents, the redirected income, the fabricated debts. The 3 days of trial, watching evidence she knew was manufactured. The original management contract that had disappeared from her solicitor's office weeks before the case was heard. When she finished, the library was very quiet. Dylan looked at the fire. "Letters," he said finally. "You mentioned correspondence between Owen and your steward." "Signed by Owen, in his secretary's hand. I kept copies of everything. I didn't know what I was keeping at the time." "Bring them." He looked at her. "Owen is going to come for the horse, and I would like to be ready for him." She studied his face. "You understand what this would cost you," she said. "Owen has connections in the legal establishment. I've served with men who are now in positions of considerable judicial authority," he said. "I have not asked them for anything in 20 years. "Why?" she said. It came out more nakedly than she intended. "Why would you do this?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because it's right," he said, "and because I am extremely tired of watching powerful men treat everything around them as though damage does not matter." He said it quietly, not as a speech, as a fact he had been carrying for a very long time. She looked at her hands. "And because," he said, more carefully now, more slowly, "I find that I am not able to watch him do this to you again and do nothing about it." She looked up. He held her gaze, not looking away, not qualifying it. She nodded. "Bring the letters tomorrow," he said. She left and sat in the library for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, with the specific expression of a man who has said something true out loud for the first time and is still adjusting to the sound of it. 4 weeks later, the carriage came up the cliff road. The Marquess stepped out with his solicitor and the pleasant smile of a man accustomed to arriving and being given what he came for. Dylan met him at the gate with Genevieve at his side. Owen's eye moved to her immediately. "Lady Genevieve." His voice was warm. It was always warm. "I had no idea you were acquainted with the Duke." "We are neighbors," she said. "How unexpected." He let the pause do its work. "Given your situation at Wren Hollow, it must be a relief. Having company." It was precisely aimed. Your situation, the exile, the reduced circumstances, the reminder that her presence here was contingent. Dylan said nothing, but his posture changed by some increment that Owen noticed and Genevieve felt. They walked to the paddock. When Corvus appeared at the far end, the Marquess went quiet. The horse was unrecognizable from the creature that had collapsed in the gate 4 weeks ago. He moved with a sureness that was almost theatrical. Head up, coat recovered, the architecture of his bloodlines visible now in every line of him. For just a moment, something crossed Owen's face that was not the pleasant expression. Then it returned. "My animal," he said. "I'll need him brought to the gate." "I have questions first," Dylan said. Owen turned slightly. "Your Grace, the documentation is." The horse arrived here starving, covered in wounds consistent with years of sustained abuse. Dylan's voice was pleasant, exactly as pleasant as Owen's. "Before I return any animal to any owner, I require an explanation." "The horse is high-spirited," Owen said easily. "My stable staff." "There is a second brand," Genevieve said. Owen's pleasantness did not disappear. It simply became very, very careful. She stepped forward. "Beneath your registration mark, older the Ashmore Crown device." She held his gaze. "I contacted the Royal Bloodstock Society this week. This horse is a direct descendant of the Ashmore champion line. His correct valuation is not what you paid for him. A pause. How did you acquire him, Marquess? That is a private matter. It will become a public matter, Dillon said, if this proceeds to a hearing. And it will proceed to a hearing. For the first time in what was probably years, Marquess Owen looked at something he had not anticipated. Your Grace. His voice was still pleasant, but underneath the pleasantness was something that had stopped pretending. I have significant connections in the legal establishment. A challenge of this nature from someone in your financial position. My financial position is improving. Would be unwise. He glanced at Genevieve then, directly at her, with the full weight of what he knew about her and had done to her. And your association with this woman is something many in London would find interesting. Her history is rather. Say the next word carefully, Dillon said. It was quiet. It was not a threat. It was simply the kind of statement that makes the air in a room feel different. Owen smiled. I was going to say complicated. My association with Lady Genevieve Oliver, Dillon said, is the best association I have made in 48 years, and you will address her accordingly. A silence. Corvus moved in the paddock behind them. The sea was loud below the cliff. You'll receive correspondence next week regarding the hearing date, Dillon said. I suggest your client review the letters he sent to a steward named Marchinson in the autumn of 1880, particularly the one concerning certain documents and their availability before a specific date. My advisors have found them very useful. The color left Owen's face, just for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to his carriage, his solicitor hurrying beside him, and neither of them looked back. That evening she told him she was going back to Wren Hollow. Not for the night. He understood immediately. She was telling him she was going back permanently. Genevieve, he's going to file a counter-accusation. She was standing at the library window, her back to him. He did this before. He'll call me the instigator. He'll say I manipulated you, that I used the horse as a means to reopen a settled case. He'll say you've been deceived by a woman with a grudge. She stopped. He'll say it in front of everyone, and people will listen, because they listened before. People were wrong before. They were wrong before, and it destroyed my life. She turned. Dillon. I am not afraid for myself. I have already lost most of what I had to lose. But if I stay here, if I allow this to become a public proceeding, it will attach to you. Your name. What little financial ground you've recovered. Whatever you're building here. She looked at him directly. I will not be the reason this cliff becomes worthless. He crossed the room. He stopped just in front of her. Listen to me, he said. I am not a young man making romantic decisions without consequences. I have spent 20 years being careful and responsible and correct. I know what I'm risking. Then you understand why I should. I understand that you are trying to protect me, he said. And I am asking you not to, because I am asking you to trust me with this, not with the legal strategy, not with the hearing. He stopped. With you. I am asking you to trust me with you. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Not crying. She was not someone who cried easily, but bright with something that had been held back for a long time. That is the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me in years, she said. I know, he said. I know it is. He reached out and took her hand, both of his around one of hers. The same careful steadiness he brought to everything. She looked at their hands. She thought about Wren Hollow. about 7 years of building something alone, about how much easier it was to trust horses than people, because horses did not choose to betray you. "Don't make me regret this," she said. "I won't," she stayed. The hearing was held in London on a Friday morning in February. The room held 200 people. Word had traveled. It always travels. Through the specific network of aristocratic gossip and whispered urgency at dinner tables, the Duke of Ormond, the Oliver woman, the Marquess Owen, the worthless cliffs that were apparently not worthless, a horse that had become somehow the center of everything. 200 people came. Some came for spectacle. Some came because they had believed the wrong story about Genevieve and felt up privately the particular discomfort of that. Some came because they had their own quieter grievances against Owen and wanted to watch someone actually press back. His barrister moved first. The counter-accusation was technically elegant. Lady Genevieve Oliver had concealed a valuable animal. She had used the Duke of Ormond, a man of reduced circumstances. The barrister implied gently, perhaps diminished judgment, as a vehicle for reopening a settled grievance. Her actions were motivated not by concern for an animal, but by personal vendetta against a man whose only crime had been pursuing legitimate legal remedy in 1880. Established, the barrister said of that verdict. Not alleged. Established. Genevieve sat straight. She did not look at Owen. She looked at her hands in her lap and thought about Corvus standing at the far fence with his head lifted to the sea wind. Dillon beside her did not move. When their barrister stood, he was very thin and very quiet, and he began with James Collard. Collard was 41 now, a solicitor in Cheapside. He had, as Dillon had observed, complicated feelings about what he had witnessed and said nothing about for 7 years, and he testified with the careful, specific precision of someone who had rehearsed truth. He had been a junior clerk in 1880. He had witnessed a senior partner remove documents from the pre-trial evidence file at the direction of Marquess Owen's private secretary. He had been told his employment depended on his discretion. He had kept notes, habitual, professional, because junior clerks who don't document things get blamed for things later. He produced them. Then came the letters, Owen's own signature, correspondence that established his knowledge of and direction over the removal of evidence. The barrister walked through each one without drama, connecting each reference to its specific outcome in the 1880 proceeding. The room was absorbing, something it had not expected. Owen sat at the barrister's table. The pleasant expressions was gone. Underneath it was the face of a man who has never genuinely had to account for himself and is now doing so in front of 200 people. Genevieve stood. The barrister had not required it. The case was sufficient. She stood anyway. She walked to the center of the room and looked at the people in it. Some who had laughed at the Oliver story in London drawing rooms, some who had repeated it without examination, some who had never thought about it at all. She spoke for 5 minutes. She did not speak about legal matters. She spoke about what it costs to know the truth of something for 7 years and be unable to prove it. Not financially, about what it costs in the quiet hours, the grinding specific weight of a wrong that the world has decided is a right. She spoke about the horse, the same man, she said, who forged documents and fabricated my incompetence and stole my life's work, also acquired a magnificent animal and treated him as disposable. He starved him. He broke him. He did not see what the horse was. He saw only what could be extracted. She paused. That is how Marquess Owen sees everything. People, property, opportunity. All of it reducible to what he can take. She looked at Owen once, directly. I am not asking for sympathy. I am asking for the actual version of events to exist somewhere in the official record, because the version that has lived there for 7 years is not the truth. She returned to her seat. The room did not stay quiet. The presiding judge reviewed for 2 hours. The verdict restored the 1880 proceedings for formal review, based on newly presented evidence of pre-trial tampering. The horse's registration was remanded pending full bloodstock investigation. The Marquess Owen was referred to legal authorities for fraud inquiry, and the judge, a careful man who chose his words with precision, looked at Genevieve and said that the evidence before the court represented a significant correction to the record. A significant correction. 7 years. Owen stood, said nothing, walked out of the courtroom with 200 eyes following him, none of them carrying the deference he was accustomed to receiving. The room watched him go with the specific, cold attention of people who have understood something they will not forget. In the corridor, a woman named Lady Ferrars, who had stood with the people who laughed 7 years ago, took Genevieve's hands without warning. I should have asked at the time, she said in a voice smaller than Genevieve expected. I'm sorry I didn't. Genevieve looked at her. Yes, she said, you should have. She said it gently, but she said it 3 months later. The geological report confirmed what Dillon's surveyor had suspected. The cliff formation at Devil's Shelf contained one of the largest deposits of rare mineral ore found in Cornwall in 30 years. The estate that London had called worthless was producing income that made his solicitor speak in exclamation points for the first time in Dillon's memory. London had been wrong about the cliff, about Genevieve, about the Duke who bought what no one wanted. London was revising its position, which it did with the specific gracelessness of people who have never learned to simply say we were wrong and instead begin speaking as though they never said otherwise. Corvus ran on the cliff path every morning now, always with someone close. He was not yet fully trusting of open ground and perhaps never would be entirely, but he ran with a freedom that made anyone who saw him simply stop and look. Several extraordinarily serious offers had come through the Bloodstock Society. Dillon declined all of them. He stays, he said. That was all. On an evening in April, Genevieve stood at the cliff edge. The sun was going down over the Atlantic in the way it did here. Colors that should not coexist but somehow did. Gold and rose and deep violet. All at once the sea throwing it back doubled. She heard Dillon's step on the path behind her. She had learned the sound of it. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that only exists between people who have been through something together. I need to say something, he said. Then say it. I have been rehearsing it for several weeks, and I am still not certain I have the words right. Say the wrong version, she said. He looked at the sea. I bought this cliff because it was the first thing in years that felt like it was mine. Not the titles, not the debts, mine. A pause, and then the storm came and the horse came and you came, and I discovered. He stopped. I discovered that I have been living a very managed life for a very long time, and that managing everything alone is not the same as living. She looked at the water. I know something about that, she said quietly. Yes. He turned to look at her. I am not good at this. I want you to know that. I am much better at geological surveys and legal briefs than I am at. He stopped. Almost, very nearly, almost smiled. At this, she repeated. I would like, he said, to build what comes next beside you. Not because either of us needs saving. Not because of the horse or the cliff or the hearing. He held her gaze. Because you are the most remarkable person I have encountered in 48 years, and I would rather spend whatever remains being unremarkable alongside you than spend it being very competent alone. The wind moved her hair. Below them, the sea moved against the base of the cliff, with the sound of something old and patient, and entirely indifferent to the opinion of London. That, she said, was the wrong version. I know. It was also, she said, the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. She turned to face him. He reached out and took her hand. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said again, more firmly, like someone planting a flag. And Dylan Pope, Duke of Ormond, who had spent 20 years being responsible and correct and alone, who had bought a worthless cliff because it felt like breathing, who had kept a dying horse alive through a storm, because some things are simply worth keeping. That man looked at this woman with the specific expression of someone who has been given something extraordinary and is determined this time not to be careful about it. He did not say anything more. He did not need to. They stood at the edge of what everyone had called worthless, looking at the sea, with the last light going gold around them and the first stars appearing above the Atlantic. Behind them, Corvus moved through the paddock with his head up. What London saw in the months that followed, the Duke of Ormond, whose worthless cliffs were producing extraordinary income, engaged to Lady Genevieve Oliver, whose full legal restoration was formally recorded in the spring. He appeared at public occasions with the specific expression of a man who has stopped managing everything alone. She appeared beside him with the expression of someone who has stopped expecting the lane to stay empty. They looked like two people who had chosen each other. Not been arranged, not settled, chosen. Marquess Owen resigned his seat on the two charitable boards he had chaired for a decade. The fraud inquiry proceeded quietly, as these things do. But the pleasant expression was gone, and the social deference that had always accompanied it did not return. Corvus ran on the cliffs every morning, scarred, extraordinary, entirely, completely alive. And at Wren Hollow, the youngest daughter of a family down the lane tended a kitchen garden with extraordinary herbs that a woman had spent 7 years learning to grow. Because some things you build in the hardest years of your life are worth passing on. Some things society calls worthless are simply waiting for someone to look more carefully. Some people who have been discarded are simply waiting for someone to see what they actually are. Some storms do not destroy what they find. Some storms carry something to exactly the right cliff at exactly the right time. And some people, two people who have both been told they are finished, discover together that they are only beginning. If this story moved you, if you found yourself in Genevieve's quiet refusal to stop, or in a Duke who bought something no one wanted because it felt like breathing, leave a comment. Tell me what moment stayed with you. And if you know someone who has been told their best days are behind them, share this with them today. Because some of the most extraordinary things in the world were once called worthless. and some of the most remarkable love stories begin with a storm.